Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, or Those Robots, if you're typing my name into the Microsoft Word spell checker. Well, we here on Musical Talk like to take a broad view of musical theatre. So we've often described this podcast as talking about musical theatre on the stage, musical films, pantomime and cabaret. Now, cabaret is a very wide term for a very wide field. It's not just one person singing or a small number of people performing in a small room, although it often is. It can be anything that's a bit, and I'm putting speech marks around this, nightclubby. But the fundamental point of all these forms of musical theatre, including cabaret, is entertainment. And so that gives us a nice broad canvas on which to bring in many things which might not obviously, at first glance, appear to be musical theatre. And if any doubts linger on what actually is musical theatre, and you're taking a narrow view instead of a wide view, I hope that this week and next week's conversation will help you see the error of your ways. Because I'll be talking to John Gieves-Watson, who is an entertainer in music. I use the word entertainer rather than musician because that's his preferred description for himself, and indeed the colleagues that he's worked with over the years in such comedy musical groups as the Temperance 7, the Bob Kerr Whoopee Band, and the Bill Posters Wilby Band. His career stretches for over 50 years. He first joined the Temperance 7 in 1959 and was performing with the Bill Posters Wilby Band regularly right up until the retirement of that band, and indeed his own retirement, at Christmas last year, 2014. Now, I hear some of you saying, which is odd, I suppose you must be shouting through my letterbox, but hang on a minute, music is a serious business. Well, as any wise and sensible person knows, there are a lot of people in this world who mistake seriousness for humourlessness, and that is a mistake. Many a student production has been ruined by an attempt to become serious by just removing all the comedy and taking everything in a po-faced way. I'm very much against po-facery. I think almost everything can be made the better by taking itself a little more lightly. That doesn't mean that it isn't done seriously. John is almost the perfect example of this, in the sense that as a jazz player, he takes his work very seriously. He is a remarkable professional. He does what he does very well, and he's extremely versatile. But he doesn't take himself or the business of playing the instrument and the music being performed so seriously that he can't have fun. And with like-minded people over the last 50 or more years, he's been able to entertain the public. It's not everyone who can say that they've had a #1 record with George Martin, the legendary record producer, and Peter Sellers doing the vocals. It's not everyone who can say that he's appeared in one of the great comedy films of the 1960s, called The Wrong Box from 1966. It's not everyone who's got a series of films under their belt, who's worked with Toto, the internationally renowned Italian comic and film actor. And as you'll hear over the next 2 episodes, John has a wealth of hilarious stories and insights into the world of British trad, jazz and comedy music, which has a long tradition going back all the way back to the 1920s. Now, I've whittled on quite long enough about this because I think it's much better to hear the story from the man himself. So, to hear about that rich vein of British light-hearted musical entertainment, let's talk to John Gieves-Watson. Musical Talk. John.
Hello.
Thank you so much for talking to me. You are a man who's had a lifetime in show business, a lifetime in music, a lifetime in performance. You've got a #1. You've worked with some of the greats, and they have worked with you, let's not forget. George Martin, Peter Sellers. You've been in the Temperance 7. You've worked with Cicely Courtnidge. You've made feature films. So you are a man who has done amazing things with a true ear for music and a true eye for comedy. Would you say that, if you were looking for a simple sentence, would that sum up perhaps some of your career?
Well, I think so, yeah. I've never considered myself a musician.
Have you not?
No. More as an entertainer who happened to play a musical instrument because I've not been classically trained. I was never trained. I'm just really been a basic chord player, never a solo player. But I've augmented that with all the visual stuff that I like doing.
I wonder how much of your... I mean, it's interesting, but you haven't been sort of speech marks professionally trained. But forgive me, you're a pretty dab hand. I've seen you perform on lots of instruments, but the big banjo seems to be your specialist area. To me, I have to say I'm a layperson when it comes to understanding how music comes out of those machines. You look amazingly dexterous and adept.
Well, I've been playing it a long time. I ought to be.
And you work for many bands, many orchestras. Well, bands, I think is the best way of putting it. Most recently, the Bill Posters Will Be band. It has to be spelt that way, I think, or pronounced that way to get the joke across. Which you were in for 31 years.
Yeah, that's
it's speech
correct.
Marks on a temporary basis, I think.
Yes,
is that fair?
Yes. Well, that was it. We started out really as that set of people as the Whoopee Band, Bob Kerr's Whoopee Band. And for various reasons, I had left because of pressure of my own graphic design business. But then Bob was taking the band over to the continent quite a lot, and that was too much for some of the guys with regular jobs, so they packed that in. And then three of them, James Chambers, Biff Harrison, Sam Spoons, Hugh Crosey was playing the piano at the time, asked me if I would help them start up again as Bill Posters Will Be band. So I said, OK, but as long as it's not for long. And does 31 years count as being as a long time? I don't know, but...
It didn't feel a long time, I imagine, did it?
Well, it didn't. It's gone pretty quickly, yes.
Now, how would you describe to someone who hadn't come across it, sort of the, I don't want to use management speak, but mission statement of Bill Posters, which we'll call them?
Well, it was a basis, really, of traditional music, traditional jazz, a lot of 1920s numbers and tunes, and some classical numbers thrown in, but with tongue-in-cheek.
Yes.
And also trying to, in my sphere, presenting visual. It had to be something that was entertaining to look at, as well as to listen to. People were always would come up and be amazed and say, "Oh, and you're all such good musicians as well."
Which takes you back to your entertainer first.
Yes, yeah.
I started coming to the Bill Posters gigs about 5-6 years ago and immediately loved them. And to me, they seem to be very much in a strong tradition, which isn't purely British, but we might talk about the difference between the British and other versions of this sort of comedy and music. But I don't think we can go too far without mentioning Spike Jones and his City Slickers. Do you see them as sort of the daddies of this, or are they a different branch?
No, they're a kind of different branch. Bob Kerr went that route eventually. But we were more on the Jack Hilton, Jack Payne show band, because they used to tour the variety theatres. And they would have, they'd play the music, but they'd also have novelty acts with them. They would have an evening's entertainment. The band as a basis, but within the band they would do comedy numbers. I remember I met their banjo player once of the Jack Hilton band.
Did you?
Emil Grimshaw. And he described some of the routines they used to do, like they used to do somewhere in Sahara, and they'd actually have a camel come on the stage.
Really? A real camel?
A real camel. And
Jack Hilton had money, I think.
Yes, and another one they'd do, he said there was a big mistake. They were doing one which was, I think, Barnacle Bill the Sailor or something like that. And the band were all on board ship with music stands in front of them, and they'd rehearsed all this. But when it came to the show, they actually had the ship moving.
Oh dear.
So none of the band could actually read the music.
Some things you don't think about in advance, I suspect.
Well, obviously they hadn't tried it out.
Would you say the sort of the best televisual equivalent of that would be the Billy Cotton Band show of the 1950s? Because Billy Cotton was a great 1930s radio and big band leader, wasn't he?
Yeah, and in fact I did appear on the Billy Cotton Band show with the Temperance 7.
In the late 1950s, I imagine?
Yes, 60s, in the 1960s.
I see what you mean, very much in that British tradition.
Yeah.
How does the American... Well, let's briefly talk about that. If Spike Jones represents the American tradition and Jack Hilton represents the British tradition of that kind of comedy send-up music, how do they differ?
Well, I think Spike Jones was very much orchestrated to be funny. It was, written down to be funny. They're very complicated routines. Whereas the English show bands over the 20s and 30s, they were performing quite straight as musicians, but augmenting their show with something visual.
Now that's a pretty distinction, to use the old-fashioned phrase.
That's my opinion.
Yes,
other people might have it as well. Yes, Spike Jones did have, and he was very visual because he had all his washboards and his horns and everything, and they did routines. But there was also Dr. Croc and the Crackpots and the Nitwits.
That's not Horsey Keep Your Tail Up, is it?
I don't know. But they were later than... They were after the war, 40s and 50s. And they were... I suppose we were quite like, those bands, because they were doing the same thing. They would do funny routines. They had the classic one where they had the black drummer playing the timpani, but the timpani was full of milk. So when he when he hit them, he would splash with milk, and he would wear this bowler hat rim, and then just take, think it was wearing a bowler hat. He had a bald head, and he'd take it off and wipe the inside of the rim, and then put it back on again. So there were all these visual things. So I guess we are nearer to those bands, the Nitwits and Dr. Croc, than any. Yes.
I always wondered, and forgive me if you'd have asked me the difference, and once again this isn't precise, but I might have said that I thought that Spike Jones has spent a bit more time, fun enough, sort of trying to prick the pomposity of classical music, because quite a lot of his televisual stuff, which has survived, is actually picking apart bits of what we would call generally classical music, rather than necessarily the pop songs or the hit songs of a day. There was an element of that, and of course they wrote several songs as well. I think you can't say that they didn't send up the songs of the day with the Glowworm and Chloe and things like that, but for the most part it seems to me they were pretending to be pricking the pomposity of an orchestra.
Well, yeah, that's true, and the Bill Posters did that as well.
But it seems to be the British tradition is slightly more poppy almost. By which I mean, I'm using pop in its broadest sense of popular music from the interwar years, etc.
Well, there was the number that they used to do. The three guys used to do Dark Eyes, which was accordion, the violin, Stroviol, that Biff used to play, and Sam Spoons on his spoons. So they were playing a sort of traditional, classical Russian.
This is the Hochachonya kind of thing, isn't it?
Yes,
which
absolutely.
is Black Eyes, as you say in Russian.
Yes, yeah. So we did the same. What other things did we do? Jealousy. It was not classical number, but it's of that genre. That will be played, but with Biff again playing it on the violin. Yes, so we did take apart some classical numbers, definitely.
Can you always put them together again afterwards, is the question, isn't it? But forgive me, you touched just in that little conversation there about the wide range of interesting instruments that you as a group played in the Bill Posters. You mentioned Biff Harrison playing, and you had a particular term for what I think of as a sort of violin fretboard and strings, but instead of having the whole, the wooden sound box underneath, is essentially just the fingerboard with what I think of as a gramophone horn.
Well, yes. It was basically a gramophone horn.
And what did you call that?
A Stroviol.
Stroviol.
There was a whole series of them that were invented or designed around about the 1900s, just before electrical amplification came in, and it was a way of projecting sound basically into a recording mic.
Oh, which was ceramic, presumably, or something.
Well, no,
much more inert, was it?
The violins. So there was a whole family of them. Cellos, bass. A friend of mine used to have the bass one as well. An enormous, horn standing on the floor. But the base of the horn would be exactly like the old-fashioned wind-up gramophone, resting on the bridge, picking up the vibrations and transmitting them through the horn, rather than the body of the violin amplifying and resonating with that. So, but with that, the sound could be directed outwards.
Of course, and in a channeled and focused way, of course, through the horn.
Yeah.
There is a danger, however, it always strikes me that the violin version, the Stroviol, looks lopsided on one side, so there's a sense that you're having to, it wants to lurch to one side because the weight is all on one side.
Well, I don't know about that, but there would also be a little, and I think he had it originally before he lost it, a little earpiece that would be nearer to his ear, so that as the sound went out, you could actually hear yourself playing through a smaller horn further up.
It's the annex around the back, as it were.
Yeah.
But you're no stranger to some of the more unusual instruments. You played the big banjo as your principal instrument, but I don't want to ruin any of the gags, but you play a very attractive vacuum cleaner, amongst other things.
Well, that was an old one I picked up in a junk shop years ago, and decided, I thought, well, this is a useful prop to do something with, and basically I fitted a whistle inside it, and it worked when you pump the thing up and down. It's one of the original vacuum cleaners that worked by manual suction, and the poor woman of the house, I suppose, would have to go around and vigorously pump this thing up and down.
But of course, at the same time, that gives you a kind of swanny mechanism, doesn't it, I suppose?
Well, that was I fitted that in.
But the idea of going up and down to create the pump is a matching motion, I suppose.
You had to do that with a swanny whistle, yes. Yeah.
Now, it always looked as though you were having tremendous fun on stage, and it also struck me, forgive me, that you were talking about the visual and being an entertainer, but in fact that you were just... And people talk about music as being something, particularly jazz, where you're constantly creative because you have to find new ways of doing it every time, and sometimes you're driven down paths you don't know that are going to be happening. But it's also true with the visual, isn't it? That you're constantly thinking about what the next performance might have, what you could bring to it. You strike me as a very, very creative man.
Yes,
lots of props.
Lots of props. I mean, I'm a prop person. I suppose that started out when when I was a youngster, and I was bored, and I said to my mother one day I was bored. I was 10 years old or something. She said, "Well, why don't you make some papier-mâché figures?" And everybody's made papier-mâché. It's lovely gooey stuff. So I made these Punch and Judy heads. And she dressed them, and so I put together a little Punch and Judy show, because I'd always watched them on the seaside. I used to go to Cleethorpes to my grandparents and always watched the Punch and Judy Professor. So I made this Punch and Judy, and I remembered the routine and did a little routine. Got an orange box, made a little stage, and Father and I carried it to primary school. And I gave a little show. It seemed to go down quite well. So then I got a bit more adventurous and built a proper little tabletop stage I could carry around, and did a performance at my school. And then the local newspapers got a hold of this, and they did an article. And I'd appeared at the just after the war. They had what they called holidays at home. And the local, this is Huddersfield, the local park, Greenhead Park, had an open air stage, and every summer they put on a talent competition for children. So I entered this talent competition with my Punch and Judy show and did quite well. I didn't win, but I think I was a runner-up. And as I said, the local paper did a piece on me, and I was sort of being booked for various shows around. And one of them I remember was the local children's home, and the mayor's car came to collect me one day to take my Punch and Judy stage to this party they were going to have, a Christmas party. And the adults had had enough of them. They'd had a game before that with playing shooting peas. So I was doing the adults disappeared. They went for a rest. Oh, he's going to entertain them now. And I'm 11, 12 years old, and stuck behind this stuck inside the Punch and Judy booth. And the kids thought it was highly amusing to try and hit the puppets with their peas. So there was a hail of peas coming through. So yeah, that was one thing I'd done as a young kid. So I was interested in making things and making props.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it also touches on that thing. The very beginning of this conversation was you're also an entertainer. There's a world of difference between making a prop and then using a prop, it seems to me. You've got that double thing going on where you're able to do something to entertain yourself and be creative physically, and then say, right, now I shall actually use these to perform. Well, it wasn't a one-off, was it?
Then I went on. But that happened when I was, at school, and then after school, the grammar school, I got into the local art school, and
this is in Huddersfield.
This is in Huddersfield still, Huddersfield School of Art, and it was a time when traditional jazz was really starting to come up. Ken Collier had started, and Chris Barber, and Humphrey Littleton. And
so this is the beginning of sort of the British jazz revival.
Yes, the revival. I thought, oh, this is wonderful stuff. I like this music. And a friend and I think we were underage at the time, but we found this band playing, a New Orleans band playing in the back room of a pub. And so we went there, and it was all dark and steamy and smoky, and I was enthralled by the trombone player, who was a tailgate-style trombone player, and he played with Ken Collier. And but it was such a hot, steamy room that he'd taken his shirt off, and he was a skinny guy. So he had these big trousers and braces, and he was, tailgating his trombone, waving it around. I thought, that's for me.
How much is it the visual, though? That's interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was the visual that got me as well as the music. So when I got back home, my next door neighbour, her husband had been a local totter, rag and bone man.
Gosh, yes.
And there were odd zithers about the house, but that wasn't a jazz instrument, a zither. So I said to her,
yes, once the third man had come, that's pretty much done, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'd said to her, look, I said, Cammy, that was what I called her, have you got any musical instruments around? And she said, well, you go up in the loft, love, and anything you find up there, it's yours. So up I went, hoped to find a trombone, but all there was a banjo.
But you'd laid claim to it.
So that was it. That was my banjo. She said, yes, you can have that. So I took the banjo and practiced the chords. And I didn't have any money. I couldn't afford to buy anything else. And then we started at lunch times in the art school, 2 or 3 of us, practicing what we could. And then...
and can you remember what the other people in your sort of little mini group were playing?
Well, one guy was trying to play the trumpet and wasn't very good and didn't get very far. But then we did a little show, a sort of rag show. The colleges have rag week.
Yes.
And I put together a little skiffle band because Lonnie Donegan was going at the time. So I had a little skiffle band going. And some other guys at the college were playing. So then we went on to 3 or 4 of us. One of them said, oh, would you want to join my band? So we practiced a bit in the local pub, and there was a clarinet, drums, and banjo, and a trombone player, and we practiced a bit, and then we got a gig in next town called Elland, and of course we didn't have transport, so I had to go on the bus, and the drummer put his gear in the well of the bus. And as it went round a corner to go down a hill, the bass drum rolled off the bus, hit the pavement, turned magically, and bounced down the road, beating the bus to the bottom of the hill.
It was a homing drum. It really made it to where it needed to go.
So anyway, that was one of my early bands. And then, of course, people see you around playing, and then I was invited to join a better band.
Is this the New Orleans Stompers?
Yes. Keith Smith's New Orleans Stompers, and it so happened that the original trombone player was actually in this band. So
really?
I got to play alongside him, and also the pianist was somebody who had been at the Almonbury Grammar School. That's Huddersfield Grammar School I was at. He was in it as well. But that was very much a strict New Orleans band. We didn't do comedy as such with that.
Is that because partly because that's what was expected, or is that, if I may say, the zealous nature of teenagehood?
Well, no, that was the nature of. They were very serious. I would say it was the revival, but what people were reviving was George Lewis and Bunk Johnson, who were not the original people. And they'd found these old boys in New Orleans who could still play. Yeah. And Bunk Johnson, they had to buy some new teeth so he could play the trumpet. And I mentioned Ken Collier, and he'd actually been to New Orleans. He'd jumped ship to go to New Orleans. He'd been a steward or something on board the ship. He jumped ship and actually got to play with some of these original black guys who were still alive. And then brought back that style of music, which was very much, very, very strict, and you had to, the line-up had to be quite strict as well. You'd had a clarinet, sometimes saxophone wasn't allowed. Anyway, clarinet, trombone, trumpet, string bass, banjo, drums, and sometimes piano. You could have a piano because Lil Armstrong played piano with Louis Armstrong, so you could have a piano. But it was all very
almost regimented.
Yes, it was a formula. So there were a lot of bands like that at the time playing in that style. So it was a very formalised style. And in fact, when the Bill Posters were doing shows, we did some of these jazz festivals, and we were okay in Bude. When we did down south, we did a Bude festival. They liked us because they'd had Bob Kerr there before, and he's a funny band, so they accepted funny bands. But you go up, we went up north to Keswick.
Oh, the Lake District, yes.
The Lake District was the Keswick Jazz Festival, and people didn't wait to hear the band. As soon as they saw accordions and violins.
Oh, really? They weren't having any of it?
They weren't having any of it. No. They had to be strict New Orleans, so they were walking out, So,
what a pity, because what they missed.
Well, exactly, yes. But no, there was still this attitude, and it still does exist. You have to have strict New Orleans.
It seems almost the antithesis of jazz would be is structure, surely, or close structure, or tightness, isn't it? It seems almost to go against what the whole thing is about. Well, having a narrow vein, I suppose.
Well, no, I think that reinforces it, because it's all, you're playing off one instrument against the other, extemporising, playing off one against the other, say, and echoing, or no, I think it's all a formula, as you say. It's a formula that they do adhere to quite, the strict people adhere to very, very firmly.
May I ask you a question about your own musical interests? Because you said that you were at Huddersfield Arts School, and that's where you started, you saw this Orleans jazz band in a pub. But during your childhood, was there a lot of music in your family? Can you look back and say, aha, my interest in this comes from that, or is it utterly different?
Well, the only thing that I can remember being impressed by, and was I went to see the jazz singer, the early
talkie, in fact,
the talkie, black and white talkie about Al Jolson, and there was a scene in that where he goes into a club. I'm not sure whether it's New York, Chicago, and there is this black band playing jazz. And that impressed me.
So your earliest musical memory,
that was my earliest
jazz,
musical memory of that. Yeah, was that of jazz, and then seeing the band in the back room of the pub, the thing sort of gelled.
Because I wondered if you might have lived in a house where people had gramophone records from the the 20s and 30s, and you were getting used to the sort of the templates of music which would later become the standards for jazz.
No,
really.
We didn't. We didn't have a gramophone. I was the first one to have a gramophone in the house. I bought a wind-up one and electrified it.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
You are creative.
I don't know. I can't remember how I did it now, but I managed to get it amplified through the radio. And the first record I bought was Ravel's Bolero.
Oh, right, okay. So you might almost say jazz-infused classical
Yes,
music. Yes,
it's the rhythm
Yes.
really appealed to me, and also I was when we were at the grammar school, we used to have Friday night. We go to ballroom dance lessons, and I bought a dance band record. Not Joe Loss.
Victor Sylvester, by any
Victor
chance?
Sylvester, yes. I bought
Strict tempo.
That's
Yes.
right. So that was my first two records I bought. And then...
Both jazz, but very much...
Well, the Victor Sylvester wasn't jazz, no.
No, but it's a small ensemble,
but strict
isn't it?
tempo.
Yes.
Strict tempo. I suppose tempo's... and
Significant,
I think that's been my forte. I'll say, not being a classically trained musician, I think I've got a very good sense of rhythm.
Because by now you had your banjo, and you said you hadn't had training. So you were just teaching yourself
Well, I got
on the spot, as it were?
Yes, I got a book, the first step, how to play the banjo, and there was a set of chords in there, showed you where to put your fingers on the strings. So I just practiced for hours, changing from one to the other.
Transition changing, essentially.
Yes, and trying to get it as smoothly as possible. But it was just 4 4 4 4 4 4. No fancy stuff. And as I say, with this first little band I was in, there was quite an embarrassing moment. We got there was clarinet, drums, and myself. There were only three of us. We got the interval spot with a better band in a pub. And
a support band, essentially.
Yes, but the clarinet player had developed to be playing a number. I can't remember what it was. Closer Walk with Thee or something. One of the traditional things. And his clarinet developed a squeak. So he started to take it to pieces. But the drummer and myself didn't know how to stop. we just sort of chundered on. The drummer doing a basic 4/4, me doing the basic 4/4. We just went on for chorus after chorus while this guy got his clarinet back together and to stop the squeak, and then he brought it to an end close. So.
But in a way, that's a perfect sketch. Inadvertent comedy rather than
well,
deliberate.
that was inadvertent, and the audience was starting to laugh at this because it was getting very boring. But anyway, I did get a bit better than that.
Well, I also, by this stage then, you've also got sort of the two twins of your later performing career, but in parallel, they're not yet touching. So you've got the art school and the creativity that's going into, you have a strong visual sense, you're learning the arts, you're developing, I suspect, an art school culture as well, because there's often a kind of culture that develops in an art school that perhaps is seen as much more free and experimental and, I have to say, fun and joyful than perhaps traditional seats of learning. And on the other side, you're performing in your New Orleans style. So you're performing, but you're not yet combining the creativity and the props and the fun of the school with the formula and the strictures of your musical output.
No, well, the first unusual instrument I acquired was, being a student, I got a holiday job in the hotel in Scarborough.
Oh, yes.
And one evening, on my evening off, I went down to a pub and there was a man there playing the spoons. And I said, that appealed to me, this rhythm going with a couple of spoons.
Which is back to tempo again, isn't it? Yes,
yeah.
I see this.
And I said, how do you do that? And he showed me how to play them. So that became my second instrument, if you like, the spoons.
Leaping a little bit onto the Temperance 7, we'll come back to them properly in the full chronological fullness of time. But you are listed as playing the banjo and the spoons in any rundown of those.
Well, yes, yeah. Well, now the Temperance 7 link is from the Huddersfield School of Art. I was able to get into the Royal College of Art. I got a grant.
Oh, right, yeah, no wonder you had to cast your memory back for that, if you don't mind me saying.
I got a grant to go to the Royal College of Art in London. I'd done 4 years in Huddersfield, and this was a 3-year course in London, at the Royal College of Art, and the headquarters were in Exhibition Row, part of the V&A Museum, and that was in the graphic school. There was quite a good social scene going. And first of all, I joined the theatre group. That little
So
theatre
Amdram
group.
kind of thing? Amdram kind of thing?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And they used to put on a show every year. And the one they were putting on that year, my first year, was a play called The Ticket of Leave Man, which was a Victorian melodrama. And it's about this prisoner who is released on probation and meets this girl and etc.
Yes.
Anyway,
Is it a good, juicy, ripe piece of Victorian
well,
writing?
it was,
sounds it.
Yes, yeah, it was, and but I was the only one with a northern accent,
Oh,
and this character was from the north,
oh, right, okay.
albeit from Lancashire, but I was from Yorkshire. But it didn't matter. I was the only one with a northern accent, so I got to play the lead in this play. So I was into the theatre thing at the college.
Can I ask, was he a villainous lead or a heroic lead?
No, he was heroic.
Oh, good.
And he had some romance, which appealed to me. But also at the college, they had the bar nights. Friday nights was bar party night. There was a little bar, and I met 2 or 3 other guys there, and they'd been in their local art schools, and every art school at that time seemed to have its own little band.
Yes.
And so we had a little band going, a piano and a trumpet, and myself on banjo, and anybody from other art schools would drop in. But also at the Royal College, it had been established for a couple of years, was the Temperance 7. And 3 of them were at the college, a couple of years ahead of me. In fact, 4 of them, well, I'm talking about 4 of them were at the college. And they used to drop in, a couple of them used to drop in on a Friday night and play along with us. Their banjo player left to go to America. He was a computer programmer.
Gosh.
He went to America. I was on the spot, and they said, "Would you like to join?"
Now, was the Temperance 7 at that stage seen as going places? Was it seen as...
No, not at all.
So it was just moving from one band to another in a sense?
It was, yes. But they were known around the art school circuit and the Architects Association. And they used to play for them and for the Chelsea Arts Club. So, and then through those connections, the Architects Association, people had seen the band and booked them for private parties and things like that.
They had a little bit of a branching out beyond the school environment.
Oh, yes, yeah. Definitely. So we were becoming to be, more semi-professional band, actually getting money.
That is a step, isn't it?
Yeah. And at one of these functions we'd been booked to appear at was the Grosvenor House Hotel, and that was for the Architects Association. And the resident band leader there was Sidney Lipton.
Now, Sidney Lipton is famous for people who know these kind of things. He's one of the 2 Sids, isn't he? He's one of the great British band leaders of the post-war period.
Yes, absolutely. No, and he was a very formal, upright, immaculate gentleman. But he could see the potential in this band, because at the time, all being at art school, we didn't have a uniform as such. We'd all gone out and bought frock coats or morning coats, button boots, wing collars.
Second hand or?
Oh, second hand.
Second hand formal wear then.
Oh, all second hand, yes. Old military jackets, and that's what the band wore. So we were eccentric looking.
Yet smart.
Yeah, well, yes.
Smartish, yes.
He saw us at one of the Grosvenor House functions and signed it up as an agent.
Which is a real stroke of luck in a way, isn't it? Because as you say, he was a name, he had links, so being taken on by him is no small thing, it seems to me.
And I think through that, I can't remember how the first record we made with EMI, which was the backing for Peter Sellers' Ukulele Lady. I'm not sure how that one came about, whether it was through Sidney Lipton or Peter Sellers had seen us at one of the functions. I don't really know.
Did Sidney Lipton not get you on the BBC as well, I think?
Well, yes. I mean,
that would have raised your profile as well, wouldn't it?
Yes. So we did do a programme. Went out, I think on a Saturday morning, it was written by the band, Brian Ennis and Paul McDowell, who did little sort of verbal sketches in it, called The Early Days of Jazz, D-A-Z-Z-E.
Hey.
And that went out, and by then the band.
This was television rather than radio.
No, this was radio.
Radio.
Yes, the
Still
first
a
thing
primary
we did.
force in.
This was the first thing we did was radio, and that was well received, and the band was sounding very good at that time. We were doing a lot of what they called head arrangements. They weren't particularly written down, but they'd been carefully worked out, and quite orchestrated. We were leaning more now to. This was at the time of the trad bands as well, where you had Ackerbilk and Kenny Ball, but we were going more back to Jack Hilton, and Jack Payne,
The pre-war
English jazz bands, and Home in Pasadena came from that. You're Driving Me Crazy came from that,
which was your number one, of course.
Yeah, and so we were playing those numbers, which were different to the other bands, and the lineup of the band, because the frontline guys were able to double on instruments. The sound of the band was much bigger than its.
It might have done, yeah.
Its numbers. From then we of course. Well, as I said, we did Ukulele Lady with backing for Peter Sellers, although he wasn't there. He dubbed it on afterwards. We did that. We did that with George Martin.
Yes, of fame. Of the Beatles.
Yes,
later. Not yet. Yes.
Not yet. And but for us, he may not have got the Beatles. I'll tell you that. Then we got a recording contract with EMI to do some tracks and lay them down, and one of the band was recording engineer John R.T. Davis, and he was keen that the band should balance itself. Not balanced by the recording engineer with slides. So the front line sat around one microphone.
Which is how they used to do it years ago. And moved in and out. If you wanted to, you were going to do your bit, you move in that balance by, moving in and out. Almost the easiest way of imagining that is in a non-musical way, when you actually see a radio play being recorded as people move in and out towards the microphone as they have their solo, if you like. Yes.
Yeah. So that's how we did those first recordings.
And yet they're very clear. The early Temperance 7 stuff is crystal recordings. Can we just explore? Do you mind a little bit about? I'm actually quite interested in what you were talking about just a minute ago, the repertoire of the Temperance 7, but also your move. You had been in Huddersfield. You've been doing Orleans music. When you joined your sort of first band at the Royal College, was that also still Orleans, or were you already spreading out?
No, it was Orleans still, New Orleans stuff, yeah.
So, but the Temperance 7, when you sort of transitioned into them, weren't, presumably. So you were stepping out of, not your comfort zone, but you were moving into a wider series of genre, would that be fair?
Well, yes, absolutely.
How did you find that?
Well, very eye-opening, really, because it was a style of music I'd not been exposed to. And the older chaps in the band were lending me records of Fletcher Henderson, Duke Ellington and the Cotton Club.
Yes, his pre-war stuff, yes.
That I found, that is still my favourite music.
Oh, it is? Oh, right, so this is a real journey of discovery for you musically as well.
It was, yeah, yes.
And you joined the Temperance 7, I think, in 1959.
Yep.
And you were talking about its repertoire. That's, Duke Ellington is a very particular style, Fletcher Henderson is a very particular style, and yet I think if you asked anyone if they were listening to a Temperance 7 record, they would say this is immaculately British. There may be an American song that's being performed, but it's done with class, if you like, whether that's put on class or, it's parody of class, but it's when does this teeter into? When does performance become pastiche? I suppose is what I'm. Were you deliberately sending it up, or were you just doing it because this is how it would have been done had it been originating in Britain? What was the thinking behind it?
Well, I can't speak for the other guys really, but my impression was that was the style of music they liked, and it was a mix of. But they liked as I say, back to the Jack Payne, the Jack Hiltons. So it was a mix of the two, really. The hot music of the black bands of the 20s and 30s, with the sophistication, if you like, for a better word, of the English bands, and we weren't ravers.
You may need to clarify that.
Well, yes. I mean, when you saw a New Orleans band, they would. It's like the original trombone player that I saw was a raver, because he would be waving his trombone about, and everybody there'd be in between the solos, there'd be clapping, the clapping in time, and all sort of playing very vigorously. But the Temperance 7 played it cool.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it.
They played it very cool.
Which, of course, is a good jazz word too.
Yes. And one of the things that I never smoked, but most of the guys liked to smoke cigars. So between numbers or between someone's solo, they'd be casually smoking a large cigar. And it was, I mean, when you're wearing these frock coats, wing collars, you actually behave in that way.
Yes, it's the Edwardian good life writ large, almost, isn't it?
It is, and I still wear that outfit. I still, that is still my attitude. I mean, unless I'm doing my sort of comedy routines, I like to play it cool.
Yes. Although in bill posters, you're wearing the frock coat, the sort of swallowtail front. You're wearing what I think of as morning trousers, grey and white striped trousers of the civil servant. But you also wear a sort of large polka dot shirt underneath. So there is a sense of enjoying yourself in the costume, isn't there?
Well, there is. I used to wear a black and white spotted bow tie with the Temperance 7.
Mm.
And then when I joined the whoopee band, that sort of migrated to the shirt as well, because all the whoopee band had eccentric outfits. Like Sam Spoons would wear, it had a bright orange suit and a bright orange trilby. And again, some of them wore frock coats. So my Temperance 7 outfit fitted in, but to compete with the others, I needed to step it up a bit. So the spotted shirts came in. I got a girl to print some material and make up some shirts, because I really brought in that fashion far before Princess Diana did.
You heard it here first. Possibly last as well. So we're still in the early days of a Temperance 7. It's developed this, I think, sort of unique British sound. It's playing the American songbook from the pre-war period, but it's got this sort of British look, this British feel, but it isn't yet a props. It's visual in how it looks. It's not adding. It's not adding that much more to it than that, is it? It has a very distinct look. We're playing an ironic line here. Please enjoy it.
Well, okay. Well, let's get back to George Martin and the Beatles.
Oh yes.
When the Beatles hit the music scene and the other bands, the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and all that, traditional jazz went out the window.
Yes, pop rather trounced everything in about 1963, would you not say?
Yes, the guitar took over. We were still playing and getting gigs, weeks in the clubs and things in the north. And we did a week at the Establishment Club in London.
Peter Cook's famous Establishment Club.
Yeah. Not many people turned up, but one man who did was a Belgian theatre owner. He owned a theatre called the 140 in Brussels. And he saw us, And he said, I'd like you to come over. We're doing a British show. I'd like you to come over. So we went over, and there was Beryl Brydon was on the act, and some other British people, some musical people. So we did this week there. And then he said, well, I'd like you to come back and do your own show, but I would like it le visuel.
As they say in Walloon.
Le visuel. So he wanted a more visual show. So I got together these little interludes, again, back to
absolutely the
Jack Hilton show. We had one which was the pianist had a butcher's bicycle with milk bottles, which he tuned, which he played with a vacuum cleaner over the top, blowing air over the top to play
it.
That
noise.
We had a chap called Will Hasty. He could play the bagpipes and the penny whistle, so he was on the penny whistle. And I was playing the spoon, so we had a little trio. That was a little trio that came on, did a number, went off, and then the band would do a couple of numbers. And then I put together an act called the Three Britons, which was a cod strongman act.
Oh, yes.
And I got these outfits together, which were black leotards.
So almost the circus strongman kind of look.
Absolutely. Bowler hats. And we were three sizes. Our singer, Alan Mitchell, who'd taken over from Paul McDowell by then, I made him a very tall bowler hat. I had a normal bowler hat, and the shortest man had a short bowler hat. I cut one in half. So the sizes were, to make it look ridiculous. And I made Union Jack knickers.
Well, yes, of course.
So we did this, and white plimsolls. So we did this thing, and we put it together in half an hour when we got to the theatre. And it really consisted of pretending to do something, the big guy was going to catch the little guy, and I would say go further back. Then we'd all run off the stage and then run back and go hoy, with a roll on the drums, as if we'd done something amazing.
Off,
but nothing.
Yes.
And then we'd do these elaborate poses, and then hoy.
This is what you're clearly setting up here is because there used to be lots of variety programs where Kenneth Williams used to do International Cabaret on BBC Two, I think, right up until the 70s. And for every good act, there was, as you say, three people in leotards essentially pretending to do some kind of athleticism or acrobat.
Well, that was the premise of the act, and it was very fast and very funny, I have to say it. And it was such that we did this show, and I'd say there were other things, visual things I put in. I built an aeroplane, because we were doing Me and Jane in the plane.
Which has survived.
Which survived with me doing it. I built the aeroplane, the folding aeroplane. So I was introducing these visual items into this show. Back to the Three Britons. About 6 months after we got back, I got a call from France, an agent in Paris, saying, "Oh, he'd like the Temperance 7 to do a TV show in Paris." I thought, "Oh yeah, great!" So I quoted him for the band and their flights and everything, and then he said, "Oh yes, okay, that's fine," thinking that he wanted the band, 7-piece band, 8-piece band. And then he said, "Do you want me to book a drummer?" And then I realised he made the Three Britons because we had the drummer doing the drum roll. There was always a drum roll and a crash. And so he thought, well, they wouldn't probably bring their own drummer over for that. So I said, so I realised it was just the Three Britons that he wanted.
A spin-off act almost,
The spin-off act, not the full band, just a spin-off act for television. So we went over to Paris and did this show, and we were introduced to the drummer, and he's saying so here's Marcel, whatever he is. He's the top modern jazz drummer in Paris. And he said, "Have you got the parts?" And they said, "Well, all we want you to do is a drum roll and a crash on the cymbal."
Yes, it's a tish boom, isn't it? Essentially.
So he thought it was hilarious. So we did this act the Three Britons. And it got even more hilarious because it was a sort of avant-garde variety show, and it was a white psych where everything was white. The floor was white, the walls were white. And when we saw ourselves back on the screen with our white plimsolls, it didn't look as if we had any feet. With these main little sticks. And so we did this act, and then afterwards... I said, we did our 3 minutes, and they came up and said, "Well, that was very good. Did you do any more?" I said, "No, that's it. That's it. Oh, carefully worked out. Is that?"
It's quite handed down from generation to generation.
So, anyway, afterwards we met the agent in the local bar, and he said, "Okay." He said, "I've got a contract here if you want to sign it."
Gosh.
So it's 3 years at the Crazy Horse Saloon.
Really? For that? I mean,
well, yes.
It sounds fabulous, but 3 minutes is 3 minutes, isn't it?
Well, yes, but he said, "Do you do other things?" And of course we did.
Yes, of course.
We the guy with the bagpipes and everything. So I said, "Yeah, we could do other things." And he said, "All right, well," but we had families, and we turned that down. So
interesting little option that might have happened.
Well, it might have happened, yeah. So anyway, back to the Le Visuel, because we got this act as a visual act now. We started to get more bookings in the northern clubs.
Oh right.
Doing a cabaret spot, and we'd double. We'd do Newcastle and Darlington, and you'd do a half-hour show in one or a three-quarter-hour show in one, and then go to the next and do the same show.
On the same evening?
On the same evening.
Oh, crikey.
It was called doubling.
As in doubling up, yes.
Yes. And interestingly, at the time, the Bonzo Dog Duo Band were doing the same thing. And we would be kind of following each other around. And it would be quite interesting, because if we'd done a club first, we'd gone back a second time, they said, "Oh, we had the Bonzo Dog here." They said they weren't as good as you. And then we get to a club, and they'd gone in there first, and we came in second, and they say, "Oh, they were better than you lot." They tell you straight. So anyway, that was going on in the later 60s, with this more of a visual thing.
But forgive me, the Bonzos, as they will feature more in the story as we move on, they started off very much in the Temperance 7 tradition, the stricter Temperance 7. Their first singles were all much more British-style jazz numberings, and it later became the slightly more art school-y, avant-garde pop.
Yes, oh, definitely. And my mother makes the music. My brother makes the music for the Talkies. It's very much from that era, and very much in what we might have been playing. Yes,
and indeed taking us back to Jack Hilton, because I'm almost entirely certain I've heard Jack Hilton do it.
Yeah.
Well, John, there's so much more to talk about your career and the Temperance 7 and music and how it developed. And I think we've still got 2 bands to get through for you. So thank you so much for talking to Musical Talk, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us again next week, when we'll hear a great deal more about the second half of your fantastic career.
Okay, I look forward to that.
Musical Talk. That was the end of the first part of that interview with John Gieves-Watson. He's tremendously good value. I find him very funny, and he's a very nice man in real life. We've met several times since the interview, and he never ceases to entertain me with new stories. And it's a real privilege to meet someone who was in a group as famous and as important as the Temperance 7. They're certainly important to me because my parents courted to their music in the 1960s, and if it hadn't gone well, I might not be here. So I owe him rather more than just an appreciation of comic jazz in the British tradition. Join me again next week and we'll hear the second part of that interview, when John will tell us more about the Temperance 7, but also moving on to other bands which came from it, all the way up to his final performances before his retirement last year in December, when he was working with the Bill Poster's Wilby Band. But I'm delighted to say that if you fancy seeing John in action, you can, because he's coming out of retirement for a special show. And you can see that on Friday, the 3rd of July. He's performing with the Lonigans in a show called the Lonigans Skiffle Party, featuring, as they say online, the Lonigans, John Gieves-Watson, and the Skiffle Express. Skiffle is a very particularly British kind of music. It's on at the Plaza Suite in the Stag Theatre in Sevenoaks on Friday, the 3rd of July, and the performance starts at 8 p.m. If you want to find out more, you can email inquiries@stag7oaks.co.uk and of course look for it online. I know for a fact that he'll be doing a number of numbers, including his legendary Singing in the Bathtub, with a whole series of puppets, which is truly hilarious. Well worth seeing. The man is genuinely a born entertainer, as I hope came out in that conversation. So that's for Lonergan's Skiffle Party at the Plaza Suite Stag Theatre in Sevenoaks on Friday the 3rd of July. Catch it and John if you can. Well, I've told you what's going to be happening in next week's episode of Musical Talk, so there's very little point in me dragging it out. If I just carry on wittering like this, we'll actually do it in real time and there won't be a gap between episodes. So I think the best way to stop that happening is to stop this episode. And the best way to stop this episode is to stop this person. And the best way to stop this person is for somebody sensible to shout, "Shut up!"
Oh, do shut up!
Oh, I've just done it to myself. Well, as the man who told me to shut up is somebody I admire immensely, I think I will take his advice. So, here's me saying goodbye for this week. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2015. And don't forget to follow us on those new social networks about which we read so much these days. And you can follow me on Twitter @MusicalTalkThos. I think we've done about an hour, by the way. So what I'd like to do is...
what I like to do is have a drink of tea.
Oh, well, in which case...
I'm a bit thirsty.